Of people coming in. It's great to see all these seats filled. We'll be back in a moment.
Question cards, anyone? Excuse me. Would you like a question card?
What does it sound?
Yeah, we can't stop it. We have line. Can I?
My bad.
Tried to get a big UMP to be people on the board, but that didn't work. That was defeated. They wanted to see environmental justice.
Oh, sorry. I didn't find a slip. I didn't find a form.
Check, check, check. This is the candidate's microphone. 1 minute.
But I went to this.
All right, we're doing a mic check for our terrific sound and video man. How are we coming in? We are doing the mic check. Headphones on, doing the mic check. How are your levels at the audio station? Ladies in chewing gum, I come before you to stand behind you to tell you something I know nothing about. Since next Thursday is Good Friday. Thank you, this is a mic check. Yes, you can. We're almost ready to begin, ladies and gentlemen. One more time. One more time for safety. This is being live streamed all around the world.
Just wait.
Billions of people on Facebook. So wave to them now. That's Becky, our live stream expert. Thank you, Becky. The camera is facing the audience right now. But
Okay. Facing you now.
thank you, Becky. How are we doing on the sound? Are we almost there? All right, Warren, why don't you come on up here too, because I'll introduce you from the podium, and we'll get started. Thanks for your patience. Oh, we have one more mic check to do?
No, it's live.
We're checking. Aerosmith will be here any moment. They're backstage warming up. Blink 182. Wow, reuniting here in Pedro. I'm very happy to hear that. Okay, you're checking. How are we doing? How's the sound in the back there? Are you happy? Are you a happy man? You're not happy. He's not a happy man. When the sound guy's not happy, none of us are happy. Okay? We turned it up. Is it better for you now? Do you like it this way? No. How are we now? Ladies and chewing. We're almost there. Okay, we've got 2 thumbs up, and we're going to get rolling, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Now, later than 7 o'clock, but I am very happy to welcome you all here to the Candidates Environmental Forum. Okay. My name is Joe Furutani. I am our moderator for this evening, and I'm the founding organizer of South Bay Los Angeles Climate Action Group. Happy to tell you that we're the oldest 350 chapter in California. We've been working with Bill McKibben since 2009, and we are very proud to be one of over 200 chapters of 350.org, the climate action group around the world. I'm especially grateful tonight to be co-hosting this forum with our allies from CBE Action. That's the 501c4. Thank you. Let's hear it for them. If you're not familiar with CBE Action, they are the 501c4 political arm of our great friends, the folks at Communities for a Better Environment. And we love their mission, and I want to get it right, of building community power to achieve environmental justice, clean energy, and healthy communities. And that's a lot of what we're here to talk about tonight. The Wilmington Improvement Network is bridging together community activists and leaders who envision a stronger and more prosperous Wilmington with the hopes of social, economic, and environmental justice for the heart of the harbor. They too are our co-sponsors tonight. We appreciate that. Last but not least, the California League of Conservation Voters, the nonpartisan lobbying and educational organization which focuses on environmental issues affecting California, is another one of our co-sponsors. CLCV's mission is to protect California's environmental quality by increasing public awareness of the environmental performance of all elected officials, working to elect environmentally responsible candidates, and holding them accountable to the environmental agenda once elected, and we love that. Our host groups tonight, we're all in agreement that during this election campaign season, we weren't hearing enough from the candidates about the critical environmental issues that impact all of us in the harbor area and beyond. We're particularly interested in the race for Janice Hahn's 44th Congressional District seat and the state Senate race in the 35th Senate District. Let me tell you that we originally reached out to all 4 candidates in these 2 races. The 2 candidates you see here tonight quickly said yes to our invitation, and we're very pleased that they're here tonight to answer our questions about these issues we consider the most pressing issues. Respond to our 5 separate requests to participate in this forum, and he thankfully showed up today to show up and try to hijack this forum, and we are not going to allow that to happen. I am sorry that Mr. Bradford was unable over the 2 months that we invited people to respond to any of our invitations, but we are not about to be taken advantage of on the day of our event and have somebody show up. If Mr. Bradford wants to do an environmental forum, we would love to attend it whenever it happens. We are disappointed that Senator Isidore Hall was unable to attend. He did respond to our invitation, and unfortunately he had a prior commitment that kept him out of town, and we're sorry that he could not be with us tonight. But we believe these environmental issues, even with 2 candidates that are not running against each other, are so important that we need to talk about these issues tonight. We need to put these questions on the record, and we need to hear from these candidates, and that's what we're going to do. So here's how we're going to do it. Our host planning committee spent the last 2 months compiling questions and selecting those that you're going to hear tonight. We have about 11 questions to explore from that list, and then we're going to give you, the audience, the chance to have some of your questions answered too. And as I mentioned, those will be questions that you pose to us on the cards that you can raise your hand and get at any point this evening. For every question that we ask, each one of our candidates will get 2 minutes to respond each. Our time Jocelyn Lopez, and she will. I'd also like to introduce our Spanish language translator tonight. And if any of you are in need of translation, please let our folks at the sign-in table know, and we'll make sure that you get a headset so that you can hear Senor Leonardo de Vilchis providing the translation for all of those who would be helped by it. Please let us know if you want a headset. And thank you, Leonardo. At the end of tonight's forum, each of these candidates will be given 3 minutes to make a closing statement. So now let's meet these candidates who are gracious and generous enough with their time to be here tonight. We'll start with Warren Furutani on the left, who is running for State Senate 35th District seat. Born in San Pedro and raised in Gardena, Warren is a fourth-generation Japanese American. During World War II, Warren Furutani's grandparents and father were forced to leave their home in San Pedro and sent to a concentration camp in Arkansas. Warren's mother and father met while in the camp, and his father was drafted into the military while still incarcerated. After the war, his parents married and returned to San Pedro to start their family. In the mid-1970s, Warren worked as a counselor at the Central Continuation High School in downtown Los Angeles. He later joined the UCLA Asian American Studies Center. In 1987, Warren became the first Asian Pacific Islander American elected to the Los Angeles Unified School District Board of Education, and in 1999 he was elected to the Los Angeles Community College District LACCD Board of Trustees. Warren was subsequently elected to the California State Assembly, where he served 3 terms. He chaired the Public Employees, Retirement and Social Security Committee, and also chaired the Select Committee on Career Technical Education and Workforce Development. Warren is a product of the Los Angeles public education system. He graduated from Gardena High School in 1965. He graduated from Antioch University with a liberal arts degree, and he's married to Lisa Abe Furutani, and they are the proud parents of 2 grown sons and 1 granddaughter. Thank you for being here tonight with us, Mr. Furutani. Pedro is running for the 44th U.S. Congressional District seat currently held by Congresswoman Janice Hahn, who is giving up her seat to run for the Los Angeles County Supervisor seat in the 4th District. Nanette was born in Harbor City and grew up the youngest of 11 siblings, raised in Carson and the surrounding area by her parents who immigrated from Mexico. She attended Stephen White Junior High School and went on to earn her BA in political science with a minor in public policy at UCLA in the year 2000, and got her law degree in 2005 at USC. While in college, Nanette started her political career at the Clinton White House in the Office of Public Liaison doing African American outreach, and in 1999 she worked with the NAACP's Washington Bureau on Health Policy. In 2003, she served as an extern to Justice Carlos Moreno at the California Supreme Court, and a year later served as an extern at the Los Angeles Legal Aid Foundation. In 2005, Nanette received an externship at the United States Attorney's Office, Central District of California, where she worked with attorneys in the organized crime and terrorism section. She began her private practice as an attorney at Latham and Watkins, but in 2012, Nanette took a leave of absence to work on President Barack Obama's campaign with the voter protection team in Florida. In 2013, she was elected to Hermosa Beach City Council on a platform opposing an oil drilling proposition, which was defeated in March 2015 by a 3-to-1 margin. Nanette left her seat on the Hermosa Beach Council in July of 2015 to run for the 44th District seat. We appreciate your participation in tonight's forum, Nanette. Now, on to our first question. And because I am the founding organizer of 350, I have the privilege of asking a question about 350. And our first question tonight is about the science of 350 parts per million. And we'll start with you, Mr. Furutani, and we'll follow that up by you, Mrs. Barragan, 2 minutes each. And here is our question. 350.org gets its name from the 350 parts per million of CO2 that NASA scientist Dr. James Hansen told Congress in 1982 was the optimal amount of CO2 if you want to continue civilization as we have known it. Today, CO2 levels are at 407 and climbing annually. Knowing what we know and knowing how this relates to global warming, can you tell us what climate change impacts do you expect to see in the harbor area in the next 10 years? And what is your sense of urgency in addressing these changes?
I think the fundamental underpinning relative to the issues we're going to talk about tonight relates to my 2-year-old granddaughter. Not only is she now looking at a world where potentially a woman's going to be president, but in terms of looking at what we need to do for the future, it's about her future and her children's future, and that's why the environmental justice movement is so critical and important. It's great that we're meeting here in San Pedro, and as everybody well knows, in this greater South Bay area, we have some of the most beautiful beaches and communities as anywhere in the world. But by the same token, we also have a strong, important, critical economic engine called the LA Port. And with the port, we have the goods movement industry. And as a result of that, we have trains, we have trucks, we have ships that come into the port, import, export. But also they bring with them the diesel fuel, the diesel particulates, and everything else that impacts the region. We also have the most oil refineries in the state Senate district as any district in the state of California. They have been great sources of jobs in the economy for the 20th century, but they can't be the economic engine for the 21st century. We have to have policies established to set goals about what we want to achieve. I'm old enough to remember that when I was a kid, some days you didn't play outside because you couldn't get full lung full of air because of the pollution and the smog. The environmental movement should take their hat off and be praised for what we've been able to do, but by no means are we done. So much more needs to be done, and that's the impact relative to the 350. Whatever the numbers end up being, we got to get them below that and make this a livable community for the future of our generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren, and thank you for stating the 2-minute limit to start us off. And let me just say, if any of you need me to repeat the question, I will be happy to do so.
Thank you, and thank you for hosting today and for the question. Climate change is real. You can't deny science. And what we're seeing happening today with global warming is we're seeing our planet warm up. If we don't act now, and we are not aggressive, we are going to see the continuation of what we've started to see, sea level rise. And when I served on a city council, I saw firsthand sea level rise and the danger it posed to the California coastline, which impacts the economy here, and it's huge. You don't have to look far to look at the weather crises that we're having, where there's storms, people are out of their homes, and right here locally, the air pollution. The 44th Congressional District is one of the most heavily polluted districts in the entire country. We need to have leadership here that's going to stand up, because this is the planet that we are going to leave our children. This is the future. Make no mistake about it. Climate change and increasing global warming is a national security issue, and we need to act aggressively and boldly. In Congress, I will work with members like Ted Lieu, who is taking action on climate change and building those coalitions, but also in this room. I'm going to work with everybody in this room to make sure that we are addressing this issue and we are building the coalitions, because we can't do it alone. I can't do it alone. I need each and every one of you to be at the table, to participate, to put on the pressure on our elected officials. We see it happen now. Some people don't even address it. Some people don't believe it. And there are some times where nobody's doing anything and nobody's standing up for the very communities that are impacted the most. And I'm looking forward to talking about environmental justice issues as well. But thank you so much for hosting this. Climate change is a huge issue. Now in this district, I'll be honest with you, the way I talk about climate change is I talk about it as a public health crisis, because that is when you have families and parents paying attention. So I look forward to having the discussion more on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. And just coincidentally, our next two questions concern environmental justice. And we'll start with you on this first one, Ms. Barragan. We know from census data and experience that people of color and those at the lower income levels are most likely to live near oil refineries and their related operations. As a result, these frontline and fence line community members suffer from high rates of asthma, lung disease, and other health damage caused by refinery emissions. The South Bay LA Harbor area is home to 6 oil refineries. What do you propose to do if elected to address the need for environmental justice action these communities are desperately waiting for?
Well, the first thing is we need leadership and people that are going to stand up. If you take a look and see what's happened in this district, a decade ago, right here in Wilmington, the city of Los Angeles allowed a project of the drilling of 400 new wells without the review, the full review of the environmental impacts. And what has happened since then? Our families here in Wilmington have bloody noses. They have headaches. They're dealing with the health impacts now. So first, we absolutely need to have leaders who are going to stand up and are going to make sure that we have full environmental reviews before anything like this ever happens again. But two, we need to hold these companies accountable. And there are many ways to do that. Right now, the Communities for a Better Environment have filed a lawsuit on this very issue, on environmental justice issues right here in Wilmington. And we need to make sure that we have leaders who are standing with the community. I've read articles and I've talked to people who said, I've reported this and nobody's doing anything about it. Where are our leaders? Where are our elected officials? But we also need to make sure we have somebody who is on the federal level enforcing these rules, enforcing the rules on the books, and it's not happening. It is not happening. It takes so many people to complain about one issue before anybody investigates this. And we have on the other side of the aisle right now in Washington, people who want to get rid of the EPA, people who want to get rid of these agencies. Locally, let's see what's happening with the Air Quality Board. Right? We need to stand together, but we also need bold leadership, and we need to work with the community, and we need to make sure that we're addressing these issues. I look forward to working with organizations like CBE, with 350, to work on these environmental justice issues so that our voices are heard. You know why it's happening in these low-income areas? There's a lot of reasons why. One of them is because there's undocumented people who don't speak up. Two, is the land is cheaper here. And three, there's less political hassle here. Go ask somebody at USC, Manuel Pastor, on this issue, who talks about why it's happening in our community right here.
Thank you, Nana. Lauren, what do you propose to do if elected to address the need for environmental justice action that these communities are waiting for?
First of all, I do not take and have never taken donations for my political campaigns from oil industry. And the reason is not to get gratuitous applause at an environmental forum, but the reason is we have to hold these oil companies in particular and other industries accountable to the communities that they're in. And the communities that the refineries are in, if you look at who lives there, it's pretty much clear what communities are being impacted most directly. Now ExxonMobil, now BPF, is a little different in the Torrance area. But the key to this whole thing for me is not to gratuitously go around and kick oil in the teeth. For me, the challenge is to hold them accountable. And the way you do that, and that's why I referenced the young people and my granddaughter first, is that I believe people get motivated and activated by self-interest. And self-interest and common sense, and we can talk about science, but the common sense of having a good environment for the future is the probably most important argument we need to make. And you and I know, because we see the refineries out our windows or when we drive down the freeway, that there's plumes of clouds every once in a while sitting on top of a refinery. There's no other cloud in the sky, but there is that cloud above the refinery. And whether it's a flare-up, whether it's a release, whatever the case may be, we have to hold the oil industry accountable to the safety of its workers and to the safety of our community. And the way you do that is through a struggle and a battle around environmental justice. This is what we're talking about. Environmental in this particular instance is the adjective. The noun is justice. The verb is to get justice for our communities. So to do that, the organizations you represent, the students that are here, we all need to work together to make sure that we make the environmental justice agenda an activist agenda that we work and organize around. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. Warren, we'll start with you on this next question of environmental justice. In the congressional and state Senate district, homes have been built on reclaimed oil fields and former industrial sites. Consequently, toxic pollutants and other hazardous chemicals have been surfacing in neighborhoods like the world-famous Carousel Tract in Carson and in the Del Amo neighborhoods. State and federal regulations currently in place have failed to protect the families who live there, and as have the regulators themselves. If elected, how will you ensure that environmental justice is fairly delivered by the regulating bodies? What specific legislation will you champion to force compliance with current clean air standards, and what extra steps will you take to protect constituents in your district? Martin?
When I was in the state assembly, I had a bill that extended the issue of how you could sue an oil company relative to their, at one time, selling their property to make homes. The Carousel Tract was the reason we did this legislation. The legislation was to deal with the issue of statute of limitations, meaning that beyond a certain point, you can no longer sue an oil company or the developer, in this case Dole, relative to the building of those houses over this old oil field. That bill, we got to the floor, but then it got defeated by, candidly, moderate Democrats. The Republicans, we knew how they were going to vote, but the moderate Democrats are the ones that killed it. And if you look at who's going to spend the most money in the 35th State Senate District or in the 66th Assembly District against Al Marsucci, in a lot of these areas, you're going to find the biggest donors to the campaign is going to be the oil companies. They have a vested interest in keeping things the way they are. So legislation is a way of doing it. Also making sure, and this is why up and down the ticket it's important to elect your local city council people and people that are at your local level in terms of government to the President of the United States. We have to be able to, at every level, and this is not the elected officials, but they're the ones that appoint people that sit on these boards, whether it's the water board or whatever the case may be, the one that was brought into the situation around Carousel Tract. These are the people we have to hold accountable, and more than that, these are the positions you have to get appointed to. That's why electing people like us is important, because we can have influence over who gets put on these boards. So legislatively, policy-wise, but every time I deal with any issue, the thing that I always come back to is grassroots organizing. That's where fundamentally the change gets made, because that's what people are going to respond to. They're going to respond to people power.
Thank you.
This reminds me of an article I read yesterday of what happened in the carousel. We had a guy who his faucet water that wouldn't go down anymore, and he called the plumber, and they found these corroded pipes just soaked in oil, and he was told he couldn't do anything. He had to wait for a settlement to come through that was going to take 5 years, and that's insane. I mean, what we're seeing happen is we're seeing the building of homes and play fields and schools over these yards, and sometimes we've seen the EIR process not go through entirely. As a matter of fact, my opponent has passed legislation that would help shorten this process and make their exceptions so companies wouldn't have to go through the entire environmental impact report review. And that's wrong. We need to make sure that we have people who are standing up to make sure we're strengthening legislation so that all the reviews are being done before we even think about building homes and schools and parks on these toxic waste dumps. But we also need to close the loopholes that are in place right now for the oil companies. And we need to make sure we're using that money to incentivize cleaner, greener businesses to come right here to the district. And I just see these environmental justice issues, and we need to have people who are going to stand up on these issues. We also need to have EPA and those organizations that are going to enforce what is in place. I would be welcomed and would love to sit down and talk about other ideas that we all have on what we can do to make sure that we're doing everything possible when they start building on these sites that are very toxic. I mean, you go by and you do this toxic tour and you see a beautiful park there, and then you find out that it's been a toxic dump site. And we need to make sure that if they're going to do it, it's cleaned up properly and that it's being paid for by the companies who caused it and holding them accountable. And that is the first step.
Thank you, Nancy. question tonight is on environmental health impacts, and we'll begin with you on this one, Nanette. And the question is, prolonged exposure to mobile sources of pollution, including automobiles, trucks, and cargo operations, have proven to cause severe health damage, including high rates of asthma in children, premature death from lung cancer, heart disease, and strokes, as well as neurological disorders in adults. If elected, how would you work with state and federal EPA to enact a fast-track strategy to immediately put commercially available zero-emission truck and cargo technology in place for daily operations at the ports of Los Angeles?
Well, first of all, we need to invest in we need to spend money in federal and invest in greener technology, and that is key. There have been efforts at the port, and that has started, but there are so many other vehicles at the port that we can make sure that we move toward cleaner vehicles. And if we have to, at the federal level, help subsidize that, then we should do that. That is where some of the money, when we close the loopholes on these oil companies, we can use to invest right here at the port. I mean, you hear things about like tell this to people in the business industry. Oh, these green rules, these green things, oh, they're just terrible. They're going to kill all the jobs. You know what? We can create jobs by investing in cleaner, greener, renewable energy, and those could be clean jobs here. And that's another way we address environmental justice issues, is we create the jobs that are going to transition us to that future. Because it's happening. It's happening.
Important is that a lot of these lands that are polluted, we're going to have to clean up. There is so much of it. We can't just say, "Oh, it's too polluted." We have to have the young people, the scientists, people getting into this environmental area of science, because we got to fix a lot of these places.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This next question will start with you, Warren, and I suspect that you may enjoy it. It's time for a question on campaign financing and lobbying's impact on our environmental affairs. Each of you has made it a point in your campaigns not to seek or accept campaign money or donations from the oil industry.
To run for office, but I take pride in the fact that I'm trying to do it the right way. Not that there's not going to be some mistakes done, but I take pride in the fact of making sure that my money comes from local folks. It comes from people that are giving from their own pockets and their own budgets, and that they believe in me as an individual, not because I represent a certain interest.
Thank you, Warren. Whether or not you think that this money causes pay to play and what you would do about it?
I absolutely think it does cause it. And in my case, my opponent is one of the top recipients of oil money. We don't need another oil company lobbyist in Sacramento or in Washington for that matter. This is a long-term congressional seat. You want to send a Democrat that's going to be strong on the environment and strong on this issue, not just going to do the bidding for the oil companies. And let me tell you, I have experience fighting an oil company. When I was on the city council, an oil company spent $2 million in 2 months trying to convince the voters that this drilling of 34 oil and water injection wells was going to be good. And guess what? We had the power of the people to get together and of harmful chemicals being stored right next to homes, right next to parks where kids play. You don't have to look very far to see what just happened at the end of August, where they had an explosion that impacted Carson and Wilmington, where hundreds of residents, half-a-mile radius, were told to evacuate. Everybody will tell you it's a safe project. I remember when the oil companies would tell me that. Oh, this oil drilling, it's going to be safe. It's safe until there's an accident. And who's at harm? It's our communities, it's our families.
people lose their jobs. The issue for me is not the elimination of the oil refineries, it's the safety of the workers and the community around it. That's the accountability we have to have. Then we have to have the vision of where we're going with this relative to the future in fossil fuels and global warming.
Yes.
But Tesoro also was infamous for another thing, along with now the new owners of the ExxonMobil plant in Torrance, PBF. These are the last two remaining refineries in the state of California that use modified hydrofluoric acid to treat their crude oil to make it gasoline. Now, there was a report done after the said that's so true, they're safe until they blow up. We have to be aggressive, we have to work with them. I don't want people to lose their jobs, I want them to have safe jobs, but people need to know, and I know I'm being redundant, the oil industry, the fossil fuel industry is the economic engine of the 20th century. It is not the engine of the 21st. Thank you.
I'll just say that I know our good friends at the Torrance Refinery Action Alliance and South Bay Flare are very happy to hear you bring up the NHF, and so are we. So now I'm going to ask a question that's very near and dear to my heart and does speak to the 21st century. And that question is about 100% renewable energy, and it's your turn to answer first, Lauren, and here's the question. In contrast to the expanding oil refinery operation that Tesoro proposes, the City Council of San Diego has passed an ordinance requiring that city to become 100% renewable powered by the year 2035. That's not an aspirational goal, that's a mandate with teeth. It also calls for them to cut their greenhouse gas emissions in half by that same year, 2035. Do you favor this approach? And how do we enact such an ordinance here in Los Angeles County?
The issue of goals I referenced relative to Senate Bill 32. Establishing goals relative to reducing the impact of from our unions, from our workers, from our companies, to our government at every level, working together with a vision. And that's why the plan about San Diego is so important. That's why SB 32 is so important. We got to know what the goal is and then reach that goal.
Thank you.
I support efforts to go 100% renewable, and I have done that. When I was on the city council, I was actually put for more aggressive measures to have the city go carbon neutral by 2020. We invested in cleaner fleets and cars, and proud to partner up with South Bay Clean Energy to make sure that we pass something called CCA, Community Choice Aggregation, which is also a measure on the local front that we can do to make sure we're moving toward 100% renewable energy. Thank you, Mr. Galliani, for leading the effort on that and educating me when I was a member of the council on it, and how we could pool our resources with other areas, other cities, to work and moving toward this renewable energy. But there are other ways we can do it too. We have Congressman Ted Lieu, who has put forth legislation that would cut natural emissions and greenhouse gases that we need to support, and we need to build coalitions. You know, we need to work with oil companies in making sure that they're seeing it here in California and convincing them that this is the future and it's going to go that way. And I've actually sat down and talked to oil companies who've said, look, we have a research department that is dedicated to making sure we're moving toward this greener technology. It's out there, it's happening, and we just have to work to go as quickly as we can. Look, when I was growing up, people always said, you can't go to college, your parents are immigrants. You can't work at the White House because you have no political connections. I'm used to people telling me that I can't do something. And every now and again I hear people say, oh, we can't do this. And I say, you know what, if we work together and we put our minds to this and we have to work and develop these public and private partnerships and work with the oil companies and work with businesses, we can do this. It really can be done. So I think there's a lot of different measures. One I didn't touch upon is Tom Steyer also has an initiative, I think it's a 30 for 30, all moving toward that and investing in solar, wind, and sustainable renewable energy. So thank you.
Thank you. Let's follow up on that just a little bit and ask you first, Nanette, how would you help make rooftop solar more affordable for the citizens of the harbor area so that they can go, folks like myself? But the biggest bang for the buck we know from our friends with Grid Alternatives, who we help put solar on the homes of low income and Habitat for Humanity homes, the biggest bang for the buck is when we eliminate the electric bill of someone whose bill is $40 to $50. So how do we do that in the harbor area for these folks?
Well, one, and I'm glad you mentioned Grid Alternatives, because that's what I was going to mention. My friend Michael, who I've known for some time, is taking the lead on that. And that is one of the things I hear in the district is, it sounds like a great idea, but I can't afford it. So one, we need to invest in federal grants and funding. Sometimes it's funding of the nonprofits that can provide these services to low-income families. But it's partnering and making the connection between that and CCA, Community Choice. So if you invest and allow them to have their solar panels up and you can make it affordable for them to have them up, then they're able long-term to afford to use those panels to generate the energy they need right at home. So it is in the long-term a dollar-saving initiative that will help, and people sometimes don't see it that way. Joe does an excellent job of trying to explain it much better than I will, and it's something that we have to really move on. We live in a sunshine state. We have sunshine here a lot. There is no reason not to invest in this right here. But the other thing that we're seeing happening too is you see these pieces of legislation that only makes it harder for people to put up solar panels. And that's backwards. We have to make it as easy as possible. We've got to cut through the red tape. And we need to make sure that we make it affordable. And if we have to help provide the funding for that and help subsidize low-income families, then I support that. And this is where you have all of these billions and billions of tax loopholes that the oil companies get right now. How about taking that money and investing it right here so that we can make it affordable for low-income families? It's not just going to affect their bottom line, it's going to affect all of ours, because that'll have an impact on environmental justice issues, on global warming, on climate change. There is a huge impact and effect. And I didn't even go into talking about the jobs that could be created. I know I've heard them talk a lot about the partnering with the unions right now to make sure that they're being trained for these jobs. They have options to provide green jobs right here. So I think there's a lot of benefit to that.
Thank you.
The issue is cost, obviously. I think people are getting it. If any of you know someone that's doing solar on their rooftop, it works. But this is where the issue of the social justice movement intersects with the environmental. When you talk about environmental social justice, what you're talking about is everybody having access to this technology in order to make sure that they benefit along with the rich and anybody else across the board. And I know we're talking about economically disadvantaged communities, but I'm talking about working class communities as well. And the way we do this, and I happen to like Governor Brown, and I think he's done some good work, but doggone, let's stop using cap and trade money for the train, and let's use cap and trade money to subsidize solar and subsidize the There's ways we can do this. And cap and trade is the perfect one if you look at what in fact it's supposed to do and how it's supposed to work. Because the issue is always dollars. The issue is always money. How can we do it if you don't have the money? We can subsidize, we can use cap and trade dollars. So in this process, and again, and I hate to be redundant, but hell with it. The young people, it's so important, and I really commend the organizers for this event, having so many students here. You're the ones that are gonna make this really happen. We're gonna get it going. You're the one that's gonna deliver this and get it over the goal line. You're the ones that's gonna say, just like Lisa, my wife, and our youngest son, he has an electric car. You're the ones that are gonna say, we're gonna use public transportation, and Uber is not public transportation. You're the ones going to set the policy for the future. We're going to help them along the way, establish some goals, and that's why I really commend the organizers for getting so many students here. It's great to have them here.
Thank you. And as one of the organizers, I want to say that we're thrilled to have as many young people here. This is your forum, and we appreciate you being here. And let's talk about where your jobs are going to come from. So, our next question is about green jobs and what we call the just transition. Many of our workers will need to move into them, and Nanette, you'll be first in this question. One obstacle to moving to 100% renewable energy is the claim that it will harm our economy due to the loss of good-paying jobs in the fossil fuel industry. Most environmental organizations, including tonight's hosts, support the policy known as just transition for workers from fossil fuels to new clean tech and renewable technologies. That would create a green economy. A just transition would require billions in funding to become a reality. What is your understanding of the concept of just transition, and where do you think the money to fund a just transition should come from?
My understanding is that this is going to provide a transition for workers to go into cleaner, greener jobs. And in doing that transition, there's going to be a lot of things that are necessary. One of them is going to be job training. And that is something that we're going to have to provide, the skills for them to get into these cleaner, greener jobs. But it's also going to be things like unemployment assistance. It's going to be temporary assistance for them to transition into these jobs. And there has been legislation on this issue. It's not a new concept, so I'm glad you're talking about it now. But this is the wave of the future, and we have to, as a nation, really invest in this. And I will keep going back to what I keep saying, and that is closing the tax loopholes that amount in billions and billions of dollars that we could be using in investing in just transition. Because these are the jobs of the future, and it's not just about jobs, it's also about the environment, and it's about the future of this planet. It's connected to climate change. And so I wholeheartedly support these transition programs that will provide the stopgap that people are going to need to convince them that it's safe, it's okay, we're going to help you move into these cleaner, greener jobs, whether it is providing the training, whether it's providing temporary assistance, whether it's providing unemployment. We have to work together to make sure we help fill that transition, because we don't want anybody to feel like they're losing their jobs and they're not going to have anywhere to go. As Warren keeps saying, this is something of the new century that we're moving toward, and a transition bill will help get there. And there are plenty of places, starting with the oil company loopholes, and holding them accountable. I mean, when you think about it, and you see how much the Tesoro executives have made, it's millions of dollars. And when you compare that to how much the workers are being paid, it's peanuts, and they're bringing in all of the revenue. So there are certainly ways to do this, and it would create jobs, I think, on a national level that will be cleaner and greener. Thank you.
Thanks. And let me ask you, before you take the mic away, let me ask you a clarifying question. When you talk about the money from tax loopholes, are you also including subsidies that oil companies get from the government?
No, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Our question again is, we're talking about a just transition. We know that it would require billions in funding to become a reality. I'd like to know what your understanding and take on the concept of just transition is, and where is the money going to come from?
For me, the issue of transition is predicated not only in terms of training workers from one kind of industry to another. The issue for me is an education system needs to make a transition as well. We have an education system, at least in our sons, both graduated from the University of California. As we look at transitioning, it's not a matter of just keeping people employed. It's getting them the skills they need to stay employed in the transition, because it isn't just going to be one transition. It's going to be constant transition, constant change, constant learning, because that's the way we're going to have to be able to operate in order to deal with the challenges of the future. So an education system for me down in the harbor area in this region would be like a maritime university. We have great programs here. ITEP is an excellent program. We have programs at the community college level. We have skills centers. We have occupation centers. We have AltaSea that's here. Southern California Occupation Center over in them together in a system that's going to educate people for the jobs of the future. But I gotta tell you the problem whether they're building or not building. But Longshore, when they fight for their unions and their members every 5 years when they do their contract, and people complain, oh damn, how could the Longshore get this? How come the Longshore get that? The reason they get it, goddammit, is because they have a union. So the union movement has to be a part of this transition. So it's not going to be easy, but it's a matter of working private, public. It's not all public, it's going to be private, public, business, labor. It's going to be all these different levels of education. But we have to transition people into the jobs of the future. And automation, oftentimes it's a stalking horse. It just means people are going to have less work.
Thank you. There was a robot that wanted to do the moderating tonight that we turned down. I appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit now about fracking, or hydraulic fracturing as it is more formally known. It's just one of the several extreme extraction methods for oil and gas production, and here is your fracking question. It is now proven that fracking and related extreme extraction techniques release large quantities of the polluting greenhouse gas methane, which, as many of you know, is 20 times more potent than CO2. That fracking also utilizes massive quantities of water, and it returns millions of gallons of what they like to call dirty, contaminated water to our underground water supply. Do you favor a ban on fracking and extreme extraction techniques? What measures would you take to end or minimize the use of fracking and other extreme extraction methods in California for oil and gas production? And let's start with the question that we always like to hear. Do you favor a ban on fracking?
Yes. I admit I have a weakness. Sometimes I watch these reality shows. And there's one called Moonshiners. Have you seen this reality show where they make moonshine? Not that I'm doing it in my bathtub. They make moonshine. Well, in one episode, these moonshiners were talking about moving their still. And when the commentator asked them, why do you want to move your still? They said, because they're fracking right in the next valley and it's polluting the water. The key to good moonshine is good water. So if the damn moonshiners know fracking's bad, surely the people in Oklahoma know it as well. It's like you take an orange, and on the outside you have the peel, and it's bright and it's clean, but you suck out all the juice. That orange is going to collapse. That's why they're having earthquakes in Oklahoma. And the other reason is because they're pumping the polluted water from the fracking into these disposable wells. And this is creating a whole other problem in terms of structural geological weakness in that area. Who ever heard of earthquakes in Oklahoma? California, yes. Oklahoma, no. That's where it's happening now. So it's like they want to take our earth and suck out every last fluid. Gold, oil, all these different things. And what are we going to be left with? What are we going to be left with? I oppose fracking.
Thank you. Your opinion of fracking.
This is nothing new for me. I oppose it as well. I was reminded when he started telling the story of the presidential debate, where Bernie Sanders was asked this question, and it was a very clear no. He had nothing else to say, and it was just like, no. And everybody laughed because there was no very long explanation after it. And that's how I feel about this issue. When I fought an oil company, there was a lot of talk about fracking, and the oil company said, no, it's not fracking. And then we looked into it, and it's like, well, any well stimulation is fracking. And there was a debate on whether it was fracking or not fracking. And I said, I don't care if it's fracking or not. It's not a good idea. But we do know that fracking is very dangerous. It could pollute the groundwater, and we are in a drought. and the millions of water that it takes for us to, for oil companies to frack is crazy that it's even thought of here. Now, we have seen the courts weigh in on this issue, and I think that has been an interesting phenomenon, and I haven't looked at the case law to see what can be done other than legislation on using the health impacts and protection of the water and our resources as a ground to maybe make it illegal. And so I do support a ban on fracking. It's going to be, as an attorney, I look at things in a legal model on how do we get around what the decision that came down is. And this is an issue that is happening right here in the district in Carson. There has been a discussion back and forth on whether to ban fracking or not. And you know, I'll tell you right now, oil companies will come in and the first thing they'll do is they're gonna threaten to sue you. I know. I've gotten a lawyer from a letter that represented an oil company. When I took photos too close to an oil company refinery, they sent the FBI. Can you imagine if you're an undocumented person, you live near these areas, how would you ever speak up? I'm an attorney and it's intimidating, right? But we have to stand together. This is an issue I've been very clear on, and we certainly need to stand together because the harms are very dangerous. This is also an issue where my opponent has failed to vote against any measures, supported them so that they don't have to release the chemicals that are in there that are so very dangerous. And that, I think, is not somebody we need to be standing up to those who want to frack.
Thank you. All right, now I have a question for you in the audience, and if you'll raise your hands, you can help answer it. How many of you here drive an electric car? Okay, that is a very small number. I'd say we have a couple of hundred people here, and I think we have maybe 5 or 6 folks. And that is the state of electric cars here in California, ladies and gentlemen. We are the state with the most electric cars, and I believe we have 3% of our total car transportation is electric. So let's ask about that. It is, in fact, it tells me right here in my script that statewide, only about 3% of cars are electric cars. And our question for our candidate starts with you, Mr. Furutani, and here it is. Gasoline and diesel-powered automobiles and trucks are one of our region's most significant sources of pollutants and greenhouse gases. Electric vehicles produce zero emissions and are routinely promoted as a pollution solution. But many people, including many people in this room, simply cannot afford an electric car. What do you know about the new legislation that makes EVs more available and more affordable for people in lower income communities? I know our friends in Environment California have been instrumental in making this happen. And so if we don't know a lot on the dais, we have information from our friends who I see in the audience. But what I want to ask is, what will you do if elected to make sure that incentives for EVs, their charging infrastructure, and energy storage go to those who need them most?
I think in some ways I've talked about this already in terms of incentives and subsidies, using cap and trade. The issue is cost. It always comes back to cost, it seems. How do we make it affordable? How do we make it workable? And then looking at that issue, I think we definitely can do legislation in terms of incentives relative to tax rebates, or at the state level, federal level, there's certain things that can be done already. But in terms of looking at how to do this so that everybody has an opportunity to go electric is critical. But the issue also is education. I mean, I'm a 60s guy. I grew up in the 60s. I used to have an orange Camaro. It was called Inferno Orange. It was a Camaro. You know what I'm saying? I'm a car guy. Now I drive a damn hybrid. You know, I got a Prius, it's green, it's cute, but damn it. The culture in California is an automobile culture. Those of us that are older know this because we grew up in it. But the 405 freeway has 6 lanes on one side, 6 lanes on the other, and it's packed every hour of the day. But we're going to put more lanes there. We're going to put another layer on it. We got to look at public transportation. We have to make sure that the green line comes down all the way into the South Bay. If we're looking at Prop M, I get it, but we got to make sure it's not just LA city-centric. It's got to be able to serve the communities that surround LA. That's how we're going to get people involved in public transportation. Looking at the electric cars, electric trucks, how to produce them, how to make them affordable. This is where if there's an initiative that's being worked on, a legislative idea, I'm all for listening to find out how we can make it work.
Thank you. And just before you answer, Nanette, I will tell you, Warren, as a car guy, you've got to get into an electric car because you've never driven anything with that much torque off the line.
I've heard that.
I speak as an electric car owner, ladies and gentlemen. Nanette, how would you help folks that can't afford electric cars move into them?
Well, you know, this reminds me of when we first had the hybrids coming out. People said they were very expensive, and I think at that time, we had the government providing these federal tax incentives that really pushed people into these cars, and then over time, we saw an investment in how making it cheaper so people could afford it. I'm one of those that as soon as I could afford it, got a hybrid, and love it ever since. I mean, for me, it was about saving money on gasoline. And at the end of the day, I was also contributing to reducing, our pollution in the air. And so it's the same thing that we need to do with that. But before we do that, or maybe at the same time, we have to invest in the infrastructure, because one of the biggest complaints that I hear on this issue is, well, how am I going to charge? What if I don't have solar panels? What if I can't afford the plug-in? I don't want to get stranded somewhere. I drive a lot, and it's a lot of planning for me. And so this is where we do need to have investment in these charging areas. When I was on the council, I voted to, and we brought in fast charging stations that they would put in next to coffee shops so people could come in and they could charge quickly. So we need to build the infrastructure, but then we also need to make sure to provide incentives. And then frankly, we just gotta lean on the car manufacturers to make it more affordable as well, because unless and until it's there, it will be harder for us to get low-income families into these vehicles. And I have yet to get into one, but that's the first thing I will look at when I'm ready to buy a new car. And one of my biggest concerns has been this whole issue of where am I going to charge. So it's not unique. A lot of people in Los Angeles drive a lot, and we need to make sure that there are plenty of places where people can go charge. It's not an inconvenience. And I think once we make it convenient and once we make it affordable, whether it's providing subsidies, whether it's providing incentives, there are ways to do this, just like we did the hybrid. And we certainly can do it. And I think the other thing too is, these batteries and making sure that there is an opportunity to have it, safe storage areas and make it more affordable.
Thank you. And that is the list of questions our committee had, and now I'm going to turn to the audience questions. And the first one is a very timely question. While we are here tonight at this forum, all across the United States and indeed around the world, there are demonstrations being held in support of our indigenous brothers and sisters in Dakota. Thank you. People are putting their lives on the line and their safety on the line in front of attack dogs and the security guards to try to stop what's known as the Dakota Access Pipeline, the DAPL. And as I mentioned, 350 and many of our fellow organizations are holding events all around the country tonight. And so we here in the South Bay have our own indigenous people. And I'd like to ask you each what you think about the rights of the indigenous, and especially when it comes to environmental justice here in our own area. How far are you willing to go to stand up for and protect our indigenous people? I think it's your
I remember back in the 70s, there was an issue of North Dakota also, but it was about Indian tribes, American Indians, and fighting for their rights to determine their own futures. My family on my father's side comes from Hawaii. And in Hawaii, there's a growing indigenous peoples movement. And it's interesting because it's connected at the hip, definitely connected at the hip, around the environment, around respect for the environment, respect for their culture, and respect for their civil and human rights. So it's interesting how if you look at any indigenous peoples movement, there's a connection related to the environment. So
to stand with people regardless of where they live, whether it's Porter Ranch, whether it is here in Wilmington, or whether it is on these lands. That we need to stand with our brothers and sisters in our community to fight for what's right and to protect our lands, whether they're public, whether they're Indian, whether they're, parks. We're seeing it happen. We're seeing it happen. Some of these lands are being sold and out in Virginia, acres and acres, and they're allowing drilling to happen on them. But I believe we need to stand together. I believe that the rights of every person should be equal, and that I will stand with them. Look, I come from parents who were immigrants from Mexico. We didn't have much. And my mom told me when I was a kid, we don't ask questions, we don't question authority. And I was always the one that said, no, Mom, we have rights. We stand up, we fight for people. And that is, for me, I think, one of the reasons I went to law school, to be able to stand up and fight for not just myself, but for other people who need a voice the most, other people who may not know as much. And so I am a firm believer, and that is why I'm running for Congress. I'm running to make sure others have the same opportunity I had, and to give a voice to those who need the most.
Thank you. Our next audience question has to do with something that's going on in Kern County right now, but it impacts all of us here. And the question is, what will you do about the issue of our crops being irrigated with oil wastewater? And Warren, it's your turn to go first.
I mean, just on the face of it, that sounds ridiculous. In terms of looking at the environmental issues across the state, I don't claim to know this particular issue. We have to come up with not only a local agenda, but a statewide agenda. And if my experience in Sacramento as an assembly person, we used to have clearly an open door policy, and people would come in, everybody would have their issue. I mean, everybody's got a lobbyist and everybody's got an issue. And every issue to everybody was the most important thing to them. What we need is really coming together to develop an agenda, an environmental justice agenda, north to south for the state of California. What better place to do it than in California, because we have the most to offer and the most to lose, just in terms of our environment. But this is where I think Bernie's commentary became so resonant with people. He wasn't just talking about getting him elected. He was talking about building a movement. And that's what this is all a part of. Elected officials are one small part of it. The organizations that organize events like this are a large part of it. Mothers, fathers, it becomes the heart and minds. That's what the battle's over. I mean, if you think about it, those of us that are old enough that had parents that were in the Depression, I used to wonder why my grandmother used to save every little piece of string, whatever came with whatever wrapping, and she put it in a ball. And then she would save aluminum foil. Even if it was a gum wrapper, she would save it. Everything got recycled. Everything, before it became popular and a fad, people come out of the Depression, they recycled everything. And I think that respect, and it was driven by the economy, but I think that respect for what you have is really critical in this environmental movement. Absolutely, we got too much shit. If you gotta rent a storage facility to keep your crap, you got too much crap. I mean, let's get housing for people that are homeless instead of putting our stuff in house. I mean, never mind, I'm sorry.
We're talking about using oil wastewater.
I thought we were talking about storage.
I think you use an appropriate word for that water. But are you aware of this issue, and what would you do about it?
I am not aware of this issue. It actually sounds very disturbing. We often regulate what can be sprayed on these crops, and it sounds like if it's happening over agricultural areas, it's a public health issue because it's harming our food supply, besides the environment. And I want to know who the heck approved this. I mean, there are some serious questions on this, and as an attorney, those are the kinds of things I want to know. Like, how did this happen, and why don't we know? And are we labeling the food that's coming from there so people know that it
No, we
is
are not.
coming from wastewater? I mean, it just sounds pretty backwards. I think there should be a full-on investigation on this, and we need to move to reverse it to make sure that this cannot happen, because I can't think of anything that is more harmful for the food supply and our environment in allowing wastewater from these oil projects that are heavily polluted, and all of the chemicals that go in there that cause cancer and everything else. It just sounds insane. And you know, I'm not too surprised every now and again when I hear about this, but this one I had not heard of. I'm glad that somebody brought this up, and I certainly am going to look into this because agricultural issues are something that we don't hear a lot about here in the district. You hear more about it in the Central Valley, but that's why these forums are great to have, because you learn from people about issues you haven't heard of, and you put it on your radar, and then you're able to talk to members, you're able to talk to others about the issue. So I appreciate that. I didn't know about it, and I am looking forward to looking into this more and seeing what we could do.
Thank you. I've got a great question here, and I want to get a temperature read in the room. How many of you rent or live in apartments? Okay, that's very good. Thank you. So the question is about, and I was a renter for many years, what about community members who live in apartments? How are they going to have more access to renewable energy? Right now, those of us who own can buy panels and put them on our roof. We can put a charger in our garage to fuel our car in there. But if you live in an apartment, you're at the mercy of the landlord. What do you do?
That's a good question. I have to give it some thought. I think that there are, well, first of all, as a renter, you have power in deciding where you live. And so we could, if we mobilize together, make sure that we rent it in places that offer these renewable energy sources and solar panels. But I think that I would love to hear ideas on what we could do. This is one that I certainly, yeah, why don't we see if you can help maybe prompt my thought on this.
One thing that we're addressing right now is increasing the green codes on building housing, you know, apartments and multiple unit living. Right now, those levels are not.
Well, I'm glad she brought that up. She talked about how we can increase the green codes, and that hits the spot because when I was on the city council, that was one of the things that came before the council. And you know, when you're on the council, you get to decide whether to adopt these green building codes at a certain level. I think it was like 30% or at 40%, and we always moved to adopt the higher of those. Not to force, but to incentivize and to really make sure that people are moving to doing that. So that is something that I've done before, something I will certainly support. We did have some pushback though from the state on that, and so making sure that when we do those types of enforcements and we move toward greener codes, that they're in line with what the state is requiring. In our situation, we actually had to turn them back for another year before we could go to the stricter standards. But I would support that.
Thank you. And I just want to mention our students, because they don't stay up all hours, they've got school tomorrow, are having to leave right now. We're going to stay for a few more questions. So let's give them a hand and thank them for being here. We appreciate everything you did tonight.
I would also urge that the students think about volunteering for Nanette in my campaign. I'm down at Center in 6th Street in San Pedro. Come on down.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go with one more audience question, and I'm sorry that we didn't know the students were leaving at 8:30 on the nose, or we would have definitely made a big pitch for all of you. You've heard now these two terrific candidates answering your questions. You have an opportunity to help fill in some of the blanks for them, and also make sure, if you like these candidates, that they have a chance to enact the things they've talked about here today. So no volunteers are more valuable to a candidate than students. So keep that in mind, and I know some of you need community service hours, so keep that in mind as well. All right, let's take one more question. You have been a fantastic audience. And here is the question we're going to ask. If you are elected, how will you work to cut back carbon emissions? What laws will you want to support to regulate the burning of fossil fuels? And Warren, let's start with you.
In terms of laws, some of my colleagues used to have a contest every year in the legislature. It was called There Ought to Be a Law. We had the weirdest laws come up in the legislative floor sometimes. But what I would commit to is that I want to put together, if elected, an environmental commission to develop an agenda for not only the 35th, but for the surrounding region, and work with other elected officials. And your organizations will be a part of that effort. And I got to tell you, sometimes working with the enviros is a pain in the ass. Everybody is so extreme, or it's got to be this, or it's got to be that. We can argue those things out. The key is to be able to get things done and move an agenda. Everything is not the same and equal. Every issue is not the same and equal. Some we can get done, some we can't, some we have to work on long range. But I'm committed to putting together an environmental commission related to the 35th State Senate and expanded to other elected officials in the area. We have some really good elected officials in the area around the issue of the environment. And put together an agenda that we start dealing legislatively with good ideas, what we want to push, what we want to move. When you come to Sacramento on the lobbying days, you come to my office. That's where you put your suitcase because you don't want to carry the thing around with you as you're walking the halls. Hang out there. We have to have an agenda and work together to get things done. I'm not just doing this for symbolic reasons. I'm not just doing this because it's fun. It's really difficult. I'm doing this to get some shit done.
Thank goodness the kids left.
I shouldn't use the S word, but
We are still live streaming.
And the students left.
we're always being watched. I think I mentioned that Ted Lieu had actually legislation on this in Congress, and so he's actually pushing legislation to cut greenhouse gas emissions and moving toward greener renewable energies. And so I would be building coalitions and working with those coalitions. When you're a new member of Congress, one of the things that's so important is that you start building these relationships. Because you have to have coalitions to get anything done. I can tell you right now, I'm going to go do this on my own, but it doesn't work that way. I've worked in Washington. I've been there, both on the Hill and in the White House. The most important thing I can do is I can go to Congress and I can find friendly members, progressives, environmental folks who care on this issue, and I've already started building these coalitions, and then partner up with them to continue to build them. And I can tell you right now, you're going to get a very different member in which coalition they're going to join if I'm elected versus my opponent. Now, in the state legislature, there's an environmental caucus. I talked to members up there who say he never showed up for a single environmental caucus, right? I have been working on environmental issues for decades. This is one of my top priorities because it's an urgent issue, it impacts the future of our country, and it impacts the air we breathe and all these environmental justice issues that we've talked about. So I'm going to work within those coalitions, but I'm going to be a leader on this. I'm not going to be a follower. Right? Sometimes when you get there, you know your place. You work together. I'm more interested in getting something done than taking credit for it. But make no mistake, I am going to be an active voice in this area. And I'm going to be standing up with the community, with the residents, and working to make sure we pass legislation to cut greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you. I have one more question from the audience that I have to ask because it comes from our friends in Wilmington, and we haven't asked a question about this, and this is a good question. Our friends in Wilmington right now, when they turn on their taps, some of them are getting water that smells bad and it's dark in color. And we have one questioner that has asthma and it's affecting them. But bigger picture-wise is the vision of Wilmington's future. And one of our questioners wants to know the very good question, will we ever see the day without refineries in Wilmington when the city is beautified with greener, cleaner businesses instead of petroleum production? Let's start with you this time, Nanette, and finish with Warren.
I'm a big dreamer, and I believe that we absolutely can and that we will. But we have to work together to get there. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen overnight. The water issue, this actually just happened in Compton, where I had calls from people telling me that the water was coming out brown. Now, immediately, what I did, our team bought all these lead kits, and we started testing the water, and then we sent it down to the Hyperion plant to see if there was something that we should make an issue, that we should bring it to the press and bring it up to elected officials. So I do think there is a day where we're going to see that. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take some of the things that we talked about today. It's going to be transitioning. And I do believe, from my talks with people in the green community, from people in the oil companies, that we know this is the future. It is already happening. And progress sometimes is very slow. And nobody wants to go faster on this issue than me because of the impacts of climate change and what we're seeing happening and the threat that it really poses to national security. So I am very optimistic that we will see that happen. But we need people in Wilmington that are going to get involved and they're going to be active and they're going to be part of the movement. Because you know what I hear a lot of? People tell me, don't bother going to Wilmington. Nobody in Wilmington votes. And that breaks my heart. My father had a home in Wilmington when I was growing up. I used to think it was really cool that the house was right next to the freeway because we would get to
Warren, your vision. I know you said that we're going to have fossil fuels for quite some time. Do you see a day when Wilmington isn't a stop on the toxic tour?
Not in my lifetime. That's why I've referenced over and over the young people. If we don't get them, and this is hearts and minds, because if you watch television and see everything, like both conventions, Democratic and Republican, the oil companies were big commercials in every one of the conventions. You saw them. All these individuals come up and I'm a power oil believer, blah, blah, blah. And then you see the tagline at the end. It wasn't Trump. Of course, it wasn't Hillary. It was the oil companies. So they're fighting over the hearts and minds, and that's where our fight has got to be as well, with the younger generation. Absolutely. And it's got to be based on self-interest, in my opinion. And I think we have all the logic. The science is there. We have all the logic behind us because we're talking about people's fundamental quality of life. But they're being bombarded with attitudes about how much to have, how bright and shiny it should be, how many things you have in your pocket, in your closet, how many, they're just being bombarded with it. We have to bombard the other side because we're fighting for hearts and minds. And a piece of that, undeniably, fundamental undercurrent, underpinning for all of this is quality of life means a quality environment. A quality environment. So in terms of a dream, absolutely. But I also have nightmares. I don't know about you folks, but I don't only have good dreams, I also have nightmares. And there are some potential nightmare scenarios out there that we all know and have seen and heard and dreamt ourselves. So it's going to be a fight, but I know for me, the fight is the next generation. The fight is the generation after that. And then what we're talking about will come to fruition. And about Wilmington, I love Wilmington. Doggone it, when you get off on the PCH, first thing I'm going to do is make sure that rather than 2 lanes turn right to go to Lomita and Torrance, doggone it, there's going to be 2 lanes turn to the left going to Wilmington. Going to Wilmington. Wilmington's got to be looked at not just environmentally, but it's got to be looked at economically, it's got to be looked at educationally. We're going to make Wilmington thrive. And there's a whole group of younger activists that are really mobilizing in Wilmington, and they are going to get out to vote. Damn right they're going to get out to vote.
Thank you. And thank you both for answering all of these questions tonight. That's all the time we have for questions. But I want to say that if you have more questions for either of these candidates, I happen to know personally they would welcome them after this event. They will welcome them tomorrow. They will welcome them every day up until the election. So don't hesitate. We started a good conversation here tonight. I urge you to finish that conversation. But for this evening, we're going to give each candidate 3 minutes to make their closing remarks and make their best case for why they should earn your vote. And we're going to start with you, Warren, and please take it away.
On December 8, 1941, my father, as he did always at that time, took his bicycle and got on the ferry from Terminal Island to come to San Pedro. He was going to Dana Junior High School. And when he got to the San Pedro side of the canal, his friends that usually waited for him there on their bikes and would ride to school together said, "Don't get off, you're a Jap." My father's family was given 24 hours to get off the island with everything they can carry, and they lost everything they had. My dad goes to a camp with his family in Arkansas, where he runs into a young woman whose family came from Sacramento, Elk Grove. They were farm workers. And as the story goes, you make lemonade out of lemons. Had they not met, I wouldn't be here. But when they got married, after my dad came back from Europe in the war, they made their way back to Channel Heights. They wanted to stay in San Pedro to raise their family. If you look around the communities that you live in, and I know Wilmington gets rough on the edges, but if you look at the potential of our communities in this area, the environmental issue is fundamental and critical. We have some of those beautiful topography and geography in the whole western United States. We cannot take it for granted. We cannot assume it's always going to be there. You got to fight to maintain it, sustain it, and make sure that it continues on for future generations. But I'll be honest with you. The biggest group relative to political donations, the largest independent expenditures in my race and in the local races is going to be paid for by the oil companies.
Yep.
So it's interesting for me because I'm an environmentalist, maybe not as green as other people want, because it's hard to get environmental endorsement these days. You got to be pretty much green all the way down to the marrow of your bones. But I accept that. But I want to make sure that if I'm going to take on the oil companies, that people are going to be standing with me. And I know you don't got a lot of money, so I'm not asking for money. But you know in politics, if you don't have money, what do you have? People. People power. And that's how we're going to win this thing. It's not going to be done with fancy commercials. It's not going to be done with all of this mail that's going to go out. It's going to be done walking, knocking, and talking. I need your help. We're going to have some folks that are going to be having fundraisers in the Pedro area. Diane Middleton and her husband are going to have one. Irene Mendoza's going to have one. Jamie Wilson's talking about having one. We're going to raise some money. Got it. I know it's not going to be a lot. We need the money. But what I really need is, God damn it, if you want to support an environmental candidate, I need you to be walking with me. I need you to be talking with me about the issues that are important to you and are important to me. Please come out and help. We can win this with people power. I'm not 70 years old. I don't have white hair. I'm 69. But doggone it, the same energy. If you can feel the burn. Furutani burns pretty hot, too. Thank you.
Thank you again for all our co-hosts today for having this forum. I can't tell you that how much it means to me. And as Joe said, we were immediately on it because we think that the environment is a huge issue, especially because this is one of the most heavily polluted districts in the country. You know, when I decided to run for Congress, it was very personal for me. It wasn't that I was just looking for a seat. It's that when I did my research on my opponent and I saw all his money was coming from the oil companies, and that's who he was fighting for, and tobacco and everything else, I said, this is a district where I grew up, where I have been for 31 of my 40 years, where you are going to get a member of Congress for a very long time. Because President Obama won the seat with 85% of the vote. And it became very personal. I live right here in San Pedro. My family has been in San Pedro for 40 years. My entire family is a family of longshoremen. So I know what it's like to be local. Sure, I left for a couple of years. But you know what? This is where my family is. This is where I grew up. And I take it very personal. And under Warren standards, I'm green to the bones because I got the endorsement of just about every environmental organization you can think of. You know, when I first approached the League of Conservation Voters, they said, Nanette, we usually don't get involved in races where there's two Democrats running. But then they did their homework. And they said, are you kidding me? This is a Democrat? And I said, yes. We need to send a strong Democrat that shares our values, who's going to be there on the environment, because it's a national security crisis. It is a big issue for us. I don't take the oil money, and there have been rumblings that the oil company has been polling in my race. So I wouldn't be surprised to see my opponent have his friends help out. But that is where it is so important that we have people come out and help out. The first thing you can do is commit to voting for me. Second, you can offer to call 10 of your neighbors, and we can get you the list of 10 of your neighbors. If everybody in this room called 10 people, we would easily start lining up thousands of votes. You can put up a lawn sign. Our office is right here in San Pedro off of Gaffey. You can come and talk to voters. We just hired about a month or so ago in the back, Taylor Ryan, who was she was the Bernie organizer for this congressional district and has been helping us mobilize progressives. The League of Conservation Voters, the Sierra Club, Democracy for America, Progressive Democrats of America, they're all supporting me because they know what's at stake in this election, and there is a lot at stake. Democracy for America has made our race a priority race. We have taken a position on TPP. My opponent won't do it publicly. Those are the differences you're going to get. Somebody who's going to be strong on the issue, somebody who's going to take positions on issues, and somebody who may not agree with you on something, but I'll tell you that. I won't sit down and tell you what you want to hear and then go to the other side and tell them what they want to hear. You want a leader on the environment, and I will give you that. I ask you to support me and help out in any way that you can. Thank you so very much.
Thanks to both of you for being here tonight and being so generous with your time. And I want to say thanks to all of you, especially those of you that have made it through here till the end. There's a lot of places you could have been tonight. There's a lot of other things you could have been doing tonight. And the fact that you were here and you're interested in these issues means the world to those of us who work on them every day as our calling. So thank you. And thanks to our friends here at Portugal Restaurant who donated this room for our use tonight as a community service. They've been fantastic and hospitable hosts, and we couldn't have asked for more. I want to also give a very special thanks to our Spanish language translator, Leonardo. He's done a wonderful job, and we appreciate you being here. To our terrific and very diligent timekeeper, Jocelyn Lopez. And thanks again to our hosts, CBE Action, the California League of Conservation Voters, the Wilmington Improvement Network, and on behalf of South Bay, Los Angeles 350 Climate Action Group, we call this forum closed and send you all home for a very good evening. Thank you for being here.
Mr. Moderator, you did a great job.
Well, thank you. Well, it's been a wonderful thing.